Hello everyone and welcome back to my brand new YouTube channel. This is very weird. It's very uncomfortable for me. I hope it's not uncomfortable for you. Today we are going to be talking about the 4 murders that happened at the University of Idaho back in November. I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into this case and really tell you everything we know about this case, because I know there's been a lot of information circulating, and this way you can have all your information in one place. And Layla's here. Layla, anything you want to say to the camera? Hopefully she stays quiet. We're gonna break this case down into, I think, 5 parts, maybe 6. We're gonna talk about how it all started, the background of this case, where this happened, and a little bit about the university in Moscow itself. Who is the suspect? That's pretty important. Why did investigators think it was him? And what comes next? That was 5, I think. I'm not good at math. Just a little caveat before we start today's video. I am by no means an expert. I am not an investigator. I am just a news junkie and I read a lot of stuff, and I figured I would share the most important pieces of information with you. Sound good? Cool. Layla's ready, and so am I. If you know absolutely nothing about this case, I am shocked, but don't worry, I'm gonna get you up to speed. Way back when, on November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed to death in their own home. This murder, I'm going to refer to it as just one murder, even though it's technically 4 murders or a quadruple murder, but bear with me. This murder happened just prior to the University of Idaho's Thanksgiving break. Police responded to a report of an unconscious person around noon on Sunday, November 13th. Investigators narrowed it down. They believed the murders happened around 3 a.m. The 4 students were found dead on the 2nd and 3rd floors of their home. What is super interesting about this case is that there were 2 surviving roommates, one who lived on the 1st floor and one who lived on the 2nd floor. The 4 students who were murdered are named Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and then Xana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin. The 3 girls lived in the house and Ethan was just a guest that night. What we know about the night leading up to the murders is it was pretty much your typical evening out when you're a college student. Ethan and Xana were out partying at a fraternity, and then Madison and Kaylee were out at a popular bar for college students. According to accounts from the roommates and surveillance footage, it is believed that the 4 victims arrived back at their house sometime around 1:45 in the morning. The 2 surviving roommates were also out earlier that evening, and they had arrived back to the house around 1 a.m. So by 2 a.m., all of the people, the victims and the 2 surviving roommates, were back in the house. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the timeline of the night and how these murders actually happened a little bit later in the video. Right now, we're just talking about the main logistics and what investigators knew at first. The coroner believed, after examining the victims' bodies, that the victims were murdered while they slept, although there were some signs of some defensive wounds, implying that maybe they got woken up as they were attacked and they attempted to fight back. According to some reports by News Nation, one of the roommates, Kaylee Gonsalves, had stab wounds that were, quote, significantly more brutal than any of the other victims. There were also some reports ahead of the stabbings that Kaylee was being stalked, but investigators have not been able to corroborate this information. Is corroborate a word? Corroborate? They weren't able to confirm the information. Investigators have said from the very beginning that they do not believe the surviving roommates were suspects or connected to the suspects at all in this case. It wasn't until about 8 hours after these stabbings took place that the surviving roommates called police. There's a lot of questions surrounding the fact that it took the surviving roommates 8 hours to call investigators, but we don't really know their headspace when this crime occurred. Maybe they were asleep, maybe they were intoxicated, maybe they were scared. Also, I just want to say to anyone who is like, how would you be able to sleep through 4 of the people in your house being stabbed to death? I know for a fact, I've slept through things louder than people being stabbed, I would assume. I don't know how loud that gets, but if everyone in my house was stabbed in the middle of the night, I can't say that I would be woken up through that. Investigators from the beginning have said there were no signs of forced entry and there were no signs of sexual assault. There were thousands of tips when it came to this case. One of the most important things that investigators were looking for was a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra. They believed that the occupant or occupants of that vehicle knew some information about what occurred in the house that night based off of surveillance video. The one thing investigators have found, and we do know that they found, is this white Elantra, so stay tuned for more information about that. The last really important piece of background about this case is that investigators believe the murders were committed using what's called a fixed blade knife, but no murder weapon has been found. So now we're going to talk about where these murders occurred. It's really important to know a little bit about the background of the city of Idaho. I'm tired. My back hurts. Now we're going to talk about where these murders happened. So you've probably never heard of Moscow, Idaho in your life. Layla, we're working our way through the video. Can you wait? That was only part 1. We have 4 more parts to go. Was that a no? Did she just shake her head no at me? Layla, come here. Oh, God. Oh, another thing that I forgot to say is that there was a dog in the house. Kaylee's dog. She was in her room. Or he, I don't know, as they were murdered. Layla, I hope you'd bark loudly enough to scare away a murderer if I ever was stabbed to death. Can you trust your dogs? I don't know. We're going to talk a little bit about Moscow, Idaho. The University of Idaho is located in Moscow, Idaho. The university itself has about 11,000 students, and the town only has about 25,000. So the university is a huge part of this very small community. Moscow, Idaho is located right along the Washington state border. That's important to remember. And as I said at the top of this video, the students were killed right before the university's Thanksgiving break. And this quadruple homicide was a huge shock to the community. Students said that before the murders, they felt super safe walking around campus. They would often leave their bikes unlocked. They were okay walking alone at night. If 4 people were murdered in a small town that I lived in, I would think twice about leaving my bike unlocked. Not that I have a bike, but still, I would think twice about it. It was reported that over a third of students who lived in the university's dorms did not return to the university after their Thanksgiving break. They decided to stay home and take remote classes until winter break. Can you imagine choosing to take remote classes? You must be really spooked. And then as for the house itself where the murders were committed, the house wasn't on campus, but it was only about a 5-minute walk from the fraternities. It was commonly known to be a party house. A lot of students lived in this house through the years. It was a 3-story house with 2 entrances, 1 sliding glass door on the second floor and 1 typical front door on the first floor. And since this house was known for hosting parties and a lot of students had lived there over the years, many people were speculating that there would be a lot of DNA in this house. You know, college parties, they're known for spreading DNA everywhere. But investigators were able to locate one really important piece of DNA that eventually led them to their suspect. We'll get to that in just a second. It had been 7 years since the town recorded its last murder. The police department itself is relatively small, and the community has been very supportive of the investigators. Layla. She's being very lovey right now. We're going to put her back up on the bed for now. Can you lay down? I'll give you some attention when the video's over. And since this was such a small police force, investigators really had never dealt with any situation like this in their careers. So they made, I don't want to say mistakes, but there were a lot of contradictions at the beginning of this investigation. For example, investigators first said that this was a targeted attack, and then they said they didn't know whether it was targeted or not. And the last thing I'll say about Moscow, Idaho is that there were, Layla, I'm going to need you to close your ears for this one. There were a couple of mysterious reports. This was like the most scandalous thing that happened to Moscow, Idaho before the attack, but there were some mysterious reports about animal deaths ahead of this quadruple murder, and even that some dogs were skinned. I know, Layla, I'm sorry that happened. So now let's talk about the suspect himself, Bryan Kohberger. I'm sure you've seen photos of this person online, you've heard his name, but let's talk a little bit about who he actually is. Bryan Kohberger is a 28-year-old PhD student at the University of Washington. I lied. It's actually Washington State University. Whoops. And you might be like, Washington University? These murders happen in Idaho. Well, Washington State University and the University of Idaho are only about a 15-minute drive from each other. Both of the universities are very close to their state's borders. Bryan was studying criminology at Washington State University, which a lot of people are like, oh, you studied criminology and you committed a crime? Suspicious. Very suspicious. Why would you study criminology if you weren't obsessed with crime? But it is important to note that criminology is more the study of criminal behavior and how criminals think, as opposed to forensic science, which might be something you would study if you wanted to know how to commit the perfect crime. Kohberger also had undergraduate degrees in psychology and cloud-based forensics, so that has a lot to do with data science, phones, surveillance videos. And an interesting fact that we learned about Kohberger after the affidavit was released is that he applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department back in fall 2022. Fall 2022 is also the same time that these murders were committed. In his application essay, he said he had an interest in assisting rural law enforcement agencies with how to better collect and analyze technological data and public safety operations, which is kind of ironic because all the tech data, all this cloud-based data, that's what investigators have on him and why they eventually arrested him. More on that in a moment. Once it was announced that Bryan Kohberger was the Moscow Police Department's main suspect and he was arrested, people went crazy trying to find information about him online. And the one thing that came up was a Reddit survey that he posted. The survey asked for respondents to provide info so Kohberger could better, quote, understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. That quote is from the affidavit. And now I want to tell you guys a little bit about these questions that he posted in this Reddit survey because it's very peculiar. This Reddit post has since been deleted and Kohberger's account has been taken down, but BuzzFeed News was able to obtain these questions before the survey was deleted, so let's go through them. So Kohberger posted this Reddit survey in June 2022, and he said it was for a research project. Did you prepare for the crime before leaving your home? How did you travel to and enter the location in which the crime occurred? What steps did you take prior to locating the victim or target? Why did you choose that victim or target over others? Before making your move, how did you approach the victim or target? What was the first move you made in order to accomplish your goal? How did you accomplish your goal before leaving? Is there anything else you did? How did you leave the scene? After committing the crime, what were you thinking and feeling? I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Sure, he's a PhD student studying criminology, and he actually probably wants to know these questions, and you're now accused of committing one of the biggest murders of the year. This seems really weird. Really weird. Now we've got, he applied for the police department, he posted this weird Reddit survey, and he's studying criminology. I mean, this is a very strange character. Bryan Kohberger was arrested a couple weeks ago and was charged with 4 accounts of first-degree murder and 1 account of felony burglary. When he was arrested, NewsNation confirmed that one of the questions that he had for investigators was whether or not anyone else was arrested. Why would that be your first question to investigators? Why not, well, when can I eat? Or why did you arrest me? Or where is my lawyer? As for the arrest itself, it happened in eastern Pennsylvania in the Poconos at Kohberger's parents' house. This happened in the middle of December, so Kohberger was probably home for winter break. And Kohberger's father flew out to Washington to drive with Kohberger back to his house in Pennsylvania. And what's really important is that the car that they drove in, a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. On their cross-country drive, Kohberger and his father were pulled over for 2 traffic violations 9 minutes apart. They were pulled over in Indiana and they were pulled over for tailgating. Investigators have said that at the time that they were pulled over, they weren't necessarily surveilling Kohberger, that he wasn't even a suspect at that point. It just happened by coincidence that they were pulled over. Officials did track Kohberger for about 4 days leading up to his arrest, and when they did arrest him, they broke down the door of his parents' house and they broke windows. So now the most important question of them all, the one that I had to refilm this video for, because I filmed this video on 2 separate occasions, and then the affidavit came out. And now we know why investigators believe that Bryan Kohberger murdered these 4 University of Idaho students. Layla wants to know why. Layla, do you know why? She thinks I have a train in my hand. I don't. Nothing. Nothing. I don't have anything in my hand. One of the strongest pieces of evidence that these investigators have against Bryan Kohberger is DNA. Investigators found a tan leather knife sheath. Ooh, say that 10 times fast. Investigators found a tan leather knife sheath lying on the bed next to Maddie, where she was murdered. Maddie was murdered in Kaylee's room. They were both laying in the same bed when the bodies were found. The Idaho State Lab was able to locate one single source of male DNA on the button snap of the knife sheath. So there's a lot of the evidence that we're going to talk about that I feel like you can really poke holes in, but this one is pretty damning. Before we get into the rest of why investigators think that Kohberger committed this crime, there were several weeks before we heard from investigators who their prime suspect was, or even if they had a suspect. They kept asking for information from the public, and a lot of people were thinking, these investigators don't know anything about this case. What we learned from the affidavit is they knew a lot, they just weren't sharing it with the public. The state of Idaho has really strong pre-trial laws that don't allow information to be released to the public until after the suspect themselves has received the affidavit for their arrest. We needed to wait until investigators had located Kohberger, and then once they had located him and arrested him, for him to be returned to the state of Idaho and presented the affidavit in court before that information could be released to the public. This information was released to the public this past Friday, and now we know a lot more about this case. When we first heard about this quadruple homicide at the University of Idaho, we were told that the two surviving roommates were asleep at the time of the murder. We now know that is not true. Investigators probably said that the surviving roommates didn't have any information in order to protect them. What we do know now is one of the roommates, the roommate who lived on the second floor across the hall from Xana Kernodle, who was murdered that night, saw someone in their house. She said she thought Kaylee, who lived on the third floor, say, "There's someone here." And across the hall from Xana's room, she thought she heard a male voice say something along the lines of, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." Someone else was probably up at the time that the intruder entered the home, and it was Xana. Xana received a DoorDash order around 4 a.m. and based off her digital footprint, investigators were able to determine that she was also on the TikTok app around 4:15 a.m. Around 4:15 a.m., a security camera near the house picked up sounds of what could be voices or whimpering, followed by a loud thud and a lot of barking from a dog. According to the affidavit, the roommate on the second floor opened her door 3 times throughout the night. The first time she heard Kaylee, the second time she heard sounds from Xana's room, and the third time she saw the intruder. And her account said that she saw a figure in black clothing with a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. Investigators believe that at this time, the intruder would have just left Xana's room. So the way the second floor was shaped, it's almost like a triangle with 3 points. Xana's room is at the front point of the triangle, the roommate's room is at the back point of the triangle, and then the sliding glass door is at the front left point of the triangle. So the intruder would have had to walk from Xana's room past the surviving roommate's room and then back down to the sliding glass door to exit the house. The surviving roommate also described the figure as around 5'10" male, not necessarily muscular, but with an athletic build. And the most important descriptor is that the intruder had bushy eyebrows. The roommate says that the intruder walked past her door while she had the door open. She saw the intruder, but she does not believe the intruder saw her, and she saw him walk in the direction of the glass door. Investigators believe that the surviving roommate probably saw the intruder when he was on his way out. Investigators were able to uncover a shoe print right outside of the surviving roommate's door, which confirmed this account. These are my hands that I'm using to motion as I discuss this case to the camera, okay? There's nothing in my hands. I'm sorry. She's now sniffing my armpit. There's no treats in my armpit. So why do investigators think that it's Bryan Kohberger? Well, some might say that he has bushy eyebrows. The description that the surviving roommate gave would be fitting for someone of his stature and the DNA that was left on the knife sheath. But also they have more. So now investigators believe that the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. So that leaves a very small window for these murders to have happened. Surveillance video showed a white sedan in the area multiple times, making at least 3 passes of this residence before it happened. The car enters the area around a 4th time at 4:04 a.m. and then it's seen departing the area of the residence at a, quote, high rate of speed at 4:20 a.m. So suspicious. A white sedan was also seen leaving Washington State University, where Kohberger goes to school, at around 2:44 a.m. and then returned to campus around 5:27 a.m. The 2015 white Hyundai Elantra was originally registered to Kohberger with Pennsylvania plates, but only a few days after the murders occurred, Kohberger changed his registration and his license plates to Washington State. And another reason investigators think that Kohberger is their guy is because the phone records of his cell phone were able to be matched up to the surveillance video of this white sedan. Now, cell phone records, cell phone pings, cell phone tower triangulation is historically inaccurate and unreliable because cell phone towers can pick up pings from phones that are 25 miles away, especially in rural areas. It definitely is not even close to pinpointing your exact location. But the most interesting thing about the data that investigators were able to find from these cell phone towers is that Kohberger's phone was off during the time of the murders. Pretty much from when he would have left Washington State University to when he would have returned home. So this is a lot of information, and it all seems to be pointing directly to Kohberger. And you're probably wondering, now what? Later this week, Kohberger will return to court, but his trial will not begin for some time. A judge has also instated a gag order in which prosecutors, investigators, and the defense are not allowed to discuss the case publicly. So we probably won't be hearing that much more information about the case now that the affidavit has been released. We won't be hearing more information about it until the trial itself. Kohberger has requested a public defender, which is free and notoriously known for being understaffed and overworked, and they have a really hard time defending in these criminal cases. So we'll see what happens with that. Idaho is a death penalty state, and it's one of the only states in the union, if not the only state in the union, that does not allow the insanity defense. Kohberger will return to court on January 12th, and he is currently being held without bail in a jail in Idaho. And even though I just said we probably won't be getting any more information about this case for some time, some more information was released just this past week that makes Kohberger not seem innocent. For example, investigators said that they saw in the time that they were surveilling Kohberger the 4 days ahead of his arrest, deep cleaning his vehicle. And it was more of a deep clean than your typical like car wash and vacuum. A lot of Kohberger's friends and people who knew him have come out and said that he was kind of bullyish and quiet and considered himself to be very smart. But I don't know how seriously you want to take that, because if I got arrested for a crime tomorrow, I'm sure there's plenty of things people could say about me that would make it seem like I would be more likely to commit that crime. Like, oh, she loves to talk into cameras and she's super obsessed with herself. Oh, and she doesn't have any boundaries with her dog and she just loves her dog so much and that's all she can talk about. Like weird stuff like that. Kohberger is also vegan, which people are like really taking into account, and they're saying like that's why he murdered the people but he didn't murder the dog, because he loves animals. Another thing that came out this past week is that investigators, while they were surveilling him, they saw him take out the trash from his family's house and he had surgical gloves on. Why would you have surgical gloves on while you're taking out the trash? Weird. All the way up until the trial, there's still going to be a lot of questions. Like, why did it take the roommates 8 hours to call police? What was actually said on that 911 phone call? Where is the murder weapon now? And did Kohberger act alone? And most importantly, what was his motive? It doesn't seem like he knew the 4 students who he murdered, but did he? And last but not least, police urge anyone with any information about this case to reach out. The whole reason they were able to find Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra is because a campus police officer at Washington State University located it and sent that tip into police. Tips are important, and you might not know how important the information you have is. And if you have any questions about this case or questions about anything I said, you can drop them in the comments below or shoot me a DM on my Instagram. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and do all the things. And Layla and I will see you next time.